Sport Business. Global Sports Intelligence.
Hello, and welcome to this week's edition of the Sport Business Podcast, getting you up to speed with the stories powering the global sports industry. I'm Catherine Davies, your podcast host, and this week we're doing things a bit differently. I've got Martin Ross, our global news editor, and Jonathan Rest, global news reporter, with me, fresh from their trip up the M40 to Oxfordshire, where they attended the 2025 IMG RedBird Industry Summit. Welcome to you both. Have you both recovered from what was surely a tough stint at the coalface?
We have. We're still sweating from our debut paddle match. Both Martin and I are now converts to paddle. So the muscles are aching a little bit now.
We are. Yeah, it was good. I won a set 6-3 with Ed Malaburn of IMG. Give him a shout out. Yeah, it was really good fun. I mean, it was productive. It was a lovely venue. It was really quite funny, actually, just all these people we write about throughout the year, and we know lots of them very well, but just to see them all kind of in the same venue, which was a Soho farmhouse in the Cotswolds. So it's a very nice venue over several acres, and everybody's got their own sort of little house, and they're all sort of bobbing around on their bicycles. So I would go to the gym, and I sort of bumped into Andrea Gaudenzi, and then I saw him cycling off back home on his bicycle with his kit, and it kind of felt almost like a little Sims version of the industry, like them all just having their own little characters and stuff. Joking aside, it was excellent, actually. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Well, some of the most influential figures in the sports business industry were there at the event to share their perspectives on where we are now and where the industry is heading. And the two of you spoke to some really heavy hitters in the industry, and we've got some audio clips from those interviews, which we'll be playing here. But first, I just want to set the scene of where you were. You said you were at the Soho farmhouse, which is set in 100 acres of Oxfordshire countryside with 10 garden rooms, 40 cabins. And interestingly, 40 piglets, says that on its brochure. It had swimming pool, saunas and cinemas and tennis courts and so forth. It had it all. Tell us what you got up to there and what struck you most about the event and the venue.
Yeah, I mean, it's the first time I'd been, actually. John had been before, but it was a mixture of panel sessions. It was a mixture of dinners and entertainment and so on, and then also sort of master classes that they put on. You could sign up to do paddle or tennis or clay pigeon shooting or a knitting masterclass with Tom Daly. Yeah, it was, in terms of the serious stuff, there were some heavy hitters there, various panel sessions, and the attendees were really, not exclusively, but really a reflection of IMG themselves in terms of their personnel, but then also IMG's main clients, whether that be NASCAR, Eredivisie, Saudi Pro League, ATP, WTA, of course there's loads more, or obviously RedBird's various clients, AC Milan naturally were there. Then other sort of industry luminaries, Shai Segev from DAZN was there, Danny Townsend from Surge, Saudi Investment Fund, Charlie Nyman from Amazon. So yeah, it was a strong mixture, and we'll be going to New York City actually next year, so there will be a big shift. Yeah, John, I don't know how you felt it was this time versus last time.
I think your point there about where it's going is what I found most interesting from having gone a couple of years ago when it was an IMG event, and this one felt much more American. You know, there was a lot more American executives there since the kind of RedBird involvement as well. I think that maybe that's indicative of where IMG's kind of wider business is now as well. You know, the streamers were there. You had John Miller from NBC. You had Justin Connolly from YouTube. Martin mentioned Charlie Neiman from Amazon, who we'll hear a bit from later on in the pod. I think it's interesting that that's where it's heading now. It can't be in a city centre, right? It needs to have that, I think, element of kind of a bit more reclusive kind of feel to it.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the retreat, is, I suppose, not that it's called a retreat, but it's a good name in terms of, I think it does kind of relax people, and, you know, you get more time with them and sort of sets the scene for people to discuss what they want to discuss. And then also, you know, there's some relaxation, although I didn't look too relaxed if you see the photo of me after paddle. But anyway, let's get down to business in terms of what was said. There was a big opener on the first evening with Adam Kelly, Mark Shapiro from TKO, and with Nick Khan from WWE. Some really good sound bites in there. Adam kind of set the scene with his sort of 10 commandments of the sports industry currently, which were interesting. I mean, some of them, of course, were related to IMG and TKO and all the rest of it. I mean, to give you a flavour, yeah, one of them was the sort of boxing problem is unsolvable, and his response to that was Zuffa Boxing debut at the weekend, which had 41 million viewers on Netflix for the Crawford-Alvarez fight. That's the series that TKO has a big involvement in itself. I won't list off the whole 10, but, you know, another one was that mergers don't work and consolidation doesn't work. He gave the example of Paramount, Skydance having sort of come very quickly out of the block with the rights deals they've signed. Yeah, and there was some, I'll let John maybe just give you the musical details, but Rag and Bone Man was there. I actually, when Adam introduced it, I thought he said Gary Rathbone. So I thought we'd kind of doubled up with the delegate and the entertainment. No, not at all. That's just a nod to our first ever podcast when Gary's musical talents got to mention one other musical guest and a mentalist, John.
Indeed, yes. Sophie Ellis-Bextor, Murder on the Dance Floor. She came on. About 10:30 she came on, which I thought was, bearing in mind we're about the same age, me and Sophie, I thought was quite late. I was flagging by then, so she did an excellent job of livening everyone up. And then before that, a guy I'd never heard of, Leo Souchard, I think I butchered his name, but he's a mentalist. And he absolutely had everyone just kind of mesmerised by guessing everything from the name of one woman's first boyfriend when she was 16 to an Italian guy's nursery school teacher. John Miller, again, another shout out for NBC, who was excellent entertainment when he had the numbers on a dice that he kept guessing. This guy just read his mind and just blew everyone's mind. So, very impressed. And everyone was somewhat scratching their head by the end of that one. But yeah, the entertainment was great. And it's just lets everyone's hair down a bit. It was good fun.
Well, I'd love to hear more about that, but I think we're here for a reason. So let's move on to our first topic of the day. We're going to discuss the themes of pay-per-view and YouTube, among others. And gentlemen, various media consumption themes cropped up during your conversations, so you've told me. And these include the move away from pay-per-view in light of the new Paramount Skydance Media swoop for the UFC rights in the US that brings an end to their pay-per-view fights. Now, Martin, you spoke specifically to some senior executives on these topics, and we'll be playing some audio clips from those interviews. What did you hear?
Yeah, I mean, the two execs in question, Mark Shapiro, the president and chief operating officer of TKO, which obviously owns UFC, IMG, and professional bull riding, and then Nick Khan, the president of WWE, TKO-owned, and then on the board of TKO. Yeah, the issue of, it's not a new issue of whether to go to pay-per-view, whether pay-per-view has a future. It's something that DAZN started wrestling with in 2018 when it had its $1 billion Matchroom deal in the US. Maybe they were too early of a mover there because in many ways that didn't work out as they'd expected, obviously. But this, I suppose, the Paramount deal, which is $7.7 billion over 7 years, is a huge shift. You've gone from ESPN's pay-per-view price of $79.99 for UFC fights to what I think, John, is $7.99 a month for the lowest tier on Paramount Plus with no ads, leaving a lot of, in some ways, consumer money on the table, but the argument being that the eyeballs to grow it to the next stage and all the rest of it, and crucially, actually, exacerbated by the piracy situation, gets us to a place where, certainly in TKO's mind, the pay-per-view model is, if not dead, or on its on life support or a deathbed. Yeah, I mean, Mark and Nick spoke about this very much from either a UFC or WWE TKO point of view, and then also it's got implications for Zuffa Boxing, which is the new boxing league headed up by Nick Khan, by Dana White of UFC, and in association with Stella Sport, PIF-owned Saudi events company and agency, and Turki Al Sheikh, chairman of the General Entertainment Authority in Saudi Arabia. So the backdrop of this is that they have this deal coming in a couple of weeks for boxing, and it won't also be pay-per-view. That was something that Mark Shapiro told us. He told us that. He reflected on the new UFC deal. Certainly Netflix came very close to getting that, and spoke about just abandoning pay-per-view more generally. And here's what he had to say.
We wanted to get out of pay-per-view. There were several suitors we were talking to who were very much turned on by the pay-per-view and would have continued that model. We're now mainstream with UFC. In order to reach new heights, we need more eyeballs. We need to expose this premier sport to more hardcore fans, but at the same time, more casual fans that need to sample it and hopefully become hardcore fans. And the only way to do that was to get on a platform that was going to make it super easy, super accessible, and super efficient, financially and otherwise. And Paramount Plus does that. These fans were paying over $100 a fight. I think there's a bunch of memes going around where a year of UFC premium content on ESPN is over $1,200, and a year of premium content on Paramount Plus is going to be, upwards of $10 a month, and you get everything. That's a great proposition for a platform that's already well established. Not a great proposition if the platform isn't already premium, but Paramount is. Yeah. So for us, it's a winning formula. I got to tell you, this sport has suffered from incredible piracy over the last few years because of those high prices and because of what we call the double paywall, the barrier to entry. And to now lift that is going to expose the masses and I think significantly multiply our fan base.
Yeah, I think it's notable just how decisive he was there about the full intention of dropping pay-per-view. I mean, they've clearly gone into these negotiations with the intention of dropping pay-per-view. They have discussed, as he said, the possibility of pay-per-view with certain broadcasters, but there's a real appetite there to drop it, and there has been a real appetite for them to move away from pay-per-view. In the boxing deal, it will not be a pay-per-view deal. As he says, the deal that will be done, which we expect to be announced at the end of the month, is going to be a US, Canada and Latin American deal with a kind of strong, I think a strong brand, they say, but I think a strong streaming brand. So, I mean, to me, that leaves you with ESPN, that leaves you with Paramount, maybe as your options. So we will find out more on that. But yeah, I thought it was fascinating to hear his opinion on that and just how strong he was on it.
His interesting quote there was about piracy, wasn't it? Which is what I know you mentioned Turki Al-Sheikh there, who has been pushing this on the Riyadh season DAZN side to drop pay-per-view for boxing. We discussed it on a pod a few months ago before a big fight about, you know, the level of piracy that is in boxing just because of the cost of a pay-per-view. I think there was a fight between, I think it was Usyk and Tyson Fury 18 months ago, and there was, 20 million non-paying customers for this fight. It was $120 million kind of black hole in boxing. And Turkey just said, I think his quotes when they announced the end of pay-per-view for Riyadh season was, pay-per-view has financially ruined boxing, which when you see the kind of numbers that are involved, you can understand his point there. So yeah, it's an interesting step, isn't it? I mean, it's a great deal for, as we said at the time, it's a great deal for UFC, to get in that level, that 7.7 billion. Whether, for Paramount, it's a big outlay, the pay-per-view buys to bring it in, aren't you? You're going to have to sell a lot of subscriptions to make that work over the years. And I remember when that deal was done, if you look the next day at their stock, the TKO stock went like that and the Paramount stock went down because, you're immediate, it's a long punt, isn't it? But there we are. Yeah, interesting quotes.
Very interesting quotes from Mark Shapiro. And Martin, you also spoke to Nick Khan, didn't you? Are we going to hear from him?
Yeah, I asked Nick for his thoughts. I mean, WWE is in a very different place when it comes to pay-per-view historically, and we've all kind of got our own anecdotes in the UK of watching maybe WrestleMania on pay-per-view on Sky, or it was certainly in the US. So a strong association there with pay-per-view, but that was a model, as he explains, that was dropped in 2014. Yeah, as the advent of consumer streaming came along. So yeah, I asked him how he reflected on that whole sector, particularly given the UFC news and the upcoming boxing news. And here are his thoughts.
And the US has been out of the pay-per-view business for over a decade, too volatile, too dependent. And at one point, again, in the US, almost 50%, 30 to 50% of your pay-per-view revenue would go to in-demand, dish or direct, the sort of intermediaries just to plug it in, which was an absurd service and consortium, which is now going by the wayside. UFC and their new Paramount deal, as you articulated, no pay-per-view. It's better. You think WWE was first mover in the space to get out of pay-per-view.
Yeah.
And UFC smartly getting out of pay-per-view.
Yeah.
Whatever deal we end up finalizing in boxing will be out of pay-per-view. So for the folks who remain in it, I think it's boxing a couple times a year. Okay. Good luck to them.
Very strong messaging there as what he thought. I mean, the context, I suppose, just a quick sort of history on what he's saying was, that they did drop pay-per-view in 2014 and launched WWE Network, which was their OTT service, which pay-per-view was the vehicle for, at that time, go back 11 years, and, like Netflix and Hulu were sort of in quite their earlier days of D2C streaming. By the time it got to 2020, they felt they couldn't compete with the number of and the proliferation of OTT streaming services there were at the time, and more pressingly, actually, the amount of money that they were spending on their services and, all the bells and whistles that they felt, that they couldn't do with WWE Network just to keep up in this sort of arms race. But again, it was a big shift. It was before, back in pay-per-view days, it was $44.95 for a WWE fight dollars, and is then moved to $9.99 a month on WWE Network. Of course, Nick is talking very much kind of from a US perspective, clearly, and maybe to put it more from a global perspective for our audience. Whether we're not talking about the death of pay-per-view. I mean, Sky's boxing pay-per-view, I think the most recent fight, which wasn't super high profile, but even Anthony Joshua's, some of his most recent fights have been priced at £19.95 sterling for a pay-per-view. Foxtel, I think over the weekend, had a fight. It wasn't one that I was generally aware of, but it was an IBF World Title Eliminator. It went out at $49.95 US, about £24 sterling. So it still exists. I think it will continue to exist in places where necessary, and there is a place for it. So that's still the appetite of a kind of Saturday night, get a number of people around and, share the cost of it. And I think it still works. I think what is more common now is the bite-sized pay-per-view, and that's not going away. Whether it's at One Football, very easy to access, quick to pay for football match at £3, £4, or Amazon. John's written a lot about this, but Amazon's kind of pay-per-view in the UK, whether it be, kind of League One for certain matches. So that shift between kind of premium high tariff pay-per-view to snackable pay-per-view, I think we'll probably see more of that.
Yeah, actually, I spoke to Alex Green from Amazon start of this week, and I actually asked him about their pay-per-view model that they've kind of introduced for Liga in the UK, Nations League, I think Bundesliga now as well. And he said it's doing very well. It's a couple of quid a game. It's not a huge ask of the audience, but there's plenty of people that do want to watch a PSG, Monaco, or wherever they are in the UK, and the Nations League stuff's done well as well. So I think that seems to certainly be something from Amazon's point of view anyway that they'll look to continue with going forward.
Great stuff, guys. That's high-level insight from the summit. So let's move along from pay-per-view and on to the notion that rights holders are embracing YouTube as a live destination. And this might be where I get my weekly mention of Cazé TV in Brazil. But let's look back at UFC and WWE. They have huge traction on YouTube, but no live coverage to date. Could that happen?
Well, I asked Nick Khan that very question, Catherine. Let's see what he said.
We love what they're doing. We love what we're doing with them. And even if you look, when they go in on something, they go all in, which is always key to us. Is it the right partner? Is it the right partner for the property? Will they understand it? Will they perceive us to be what we hope they perceive us to be, the experts in that space? And they're there just to amplify what we're doing. If so, there's always magic that can happen. For now, we're good with these big properties where they are. But on these other properties, including the library, let's see where it all ends up.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose a polite way there of saying that, they have all the rights deals tied up, but they wouldn't want to rule it out in the future. We're seeing YouTube coming to the table more and more in the live rights discussions, albeit very prudent still, too prudent for some rights holders' liking, but not to underplay just how big a destination YouTube is for WWE fans. It's huge for, archive, shoulder content, various content, so that's where WWE is placed. UFC, as Mark said, was in talks with YouTube about this live rights package. Didn't come to fruition, but I did ask him the question from a global point of view as well. I asked him whether he could see YouTube being a buyer of rights to TKO properties in general, be that in the US or be that in any global markets, and this was his response.
Just a matter of time. I mean, look, the NFL is incredible. Sunday Ticket is an incredible property for them, and an incredible user experience. And now they're out of the gate with their first NFL game, which, did very well, 18 million viewers, and they're just getting started. I expect them to get in a big way for live events, in the sports space, and we aim to be their partner. Whether that's helping them identify and acquire those rights through IMG, or it's new content that we produce under the TKO label.
Have you had them across the other side of the negotiating table?
We have. They were at the table in the UFC. Yeah. And that alliance, didn't come to fruition. But as it relates to your point, to short-form content and highlights, they're the premier destination for the UFC. And we're going to look to exercise and enhance and leverage that at every turn.
So, yeah, I mean, clearly the door's open again there for the future. YouTube aren't going away. I think the important specification there is they were talking to YouTube itself. We're not talking about, a streamer or a broadcaster that set up a YouTube channel and looked to acquire or buy rights or revenue share on rights. For that, this was a bit like NFL, a YouTube style deal. And that's what I was asking him about. That was a big topic of conversation at the summit. Yeah, as I said, there's a couple of references to just maybe how the pace of YouTube's acquisitions is maybe not quite what some people would hope. So I think Netflix has obviously been busier, but that they expect the audience figures from NFL Brazil or other recent examples to really maybe pick up YouTube appetite going forward.
Still think it's interesting how YouTube themselves kind of talk about their role in the industry. I mean, Justin Connolly, who I mentioned earlier, he's the global head of media and sports at YouTube. He was on a panel session, and they still really want to emphasize the fact that they are a partner. You know, they're going to come, they're going to help you grow your fandom, bring younger demographic, make sure there's I think he talked about creating kind of personalized content. They still see themselves in that sense, as rather than when you're talking to the other kind of big streamers, they're much more about aggressively acquiring rights, going up against each other. Yes, they can offer a different fan age, I guess, but YouTube still talks about, the partnership, the fandom, building things together. I think he referenced WWE on stage. He said, I think there's like 110 million followers on the WWE YouTube page or some ridiculous number like that. So they've certainly got the audience to be able to go in and just buy a massive package of rights, but they still like to position themselves as being a kind of friend of everyone at the moment.
Listening to these comments, it really brings forth to me the value of being at an event like this. You get to speak to these guys informally, and they really open up, don't they? So going to a summit, going to SportTel, there's a lot of value in speaking one-on-one with these guys and getting them in with a microphone and having them speak to you. Incredibly useful, isn't it?
Yeah, they were also very open to speaking to us, which was nice. I did stop short of sometimes sitting myself down and at dinner right next to people who are clearly in the middle of what might be sort of preliminary rights talks, and then all of a sudden you go and sort of sit down. Maybe not the most wanted accompaniment to your dinner, but everybody was super up for chatting, which was great.
All right. Well, great stuff there. Thank you both. Really solid intelligence from the IMG RedBird Summit. We're going to take a short break now, and we'll be back with some more headline intelligence from Oxfordshire.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with Sport Business newsletters, covering the biggest stories driving the industry, delivered straight to your inbox at no cost. Sign up today at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, where this week it's all about the IMG RedBird Summit and the insights that our reporters Martin and John picked up from the movers and shakers in the industry. Now, we've written extensively about Amazon's increasing presence in sport, in NASCAR, of course, tennis, cricket, and this week, perhaps one of the most surprising new deals with the U.S. Masters Golf, the Masters at Augusta. And it's considered one of the most traditional of the four golf majors. And now, Amazon Prime Video is going to be showing live coverage of the 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. sessions on Thursdays and Fridays, which leads into the ESPN broadcast later in the day. So this was the big news item to break during the summit, wasn't it, John? Tell us who you spoke to about that.
Yeah, so as you mentioned, the kind of background of that, we spoke to Charlie Neiman, who's the head of sports partnerships at Amazon Prime Video, about this deal. Because as you mentioned, Catherine, the Masters is seen as the bastion of tradition, if you like. They famously don't charge rights fees in the US. You can buy a cheese sandwich for $1 or something like that. And whereas you go to any other major sporting event, remember when Martin spoke about the cost of a hat at Wimbledon was like 150 quid or something like that. So it's interesting that they've kind of now brought on board an ultimate disruptor, if you like, in Amazon. So I spoke to Charlie about how that deal came about and why they see themselves and the Masters see Amazon as ideal partners.
I think the way that Augusta National thinks about their patrons and their fans and how they think about the business is very similar to us. And that is a couple of things. One is obsessed with customers and down to minute details, like you mentioned, their concessions. We are similar. We spend our time thinking about, what is the experience of every piece of our offering to customers. I think there's a long-term focus. We think very much in, okay, we're invested in this business. We want to build a great and durable product for fans. What does that look like? Augusta National, very focused on that. And I think just the desire to innovate together. And so I think we are going to be able to explore a lot of interesting things over time together. It was really just a kind of a marriage of values and ideals fitting really. I think fans have been clamoring, and any golf fan will tell you, fans of the Masters have been clamoring for these additional hours and kind of the early on Thursday and Friday. So we're excited to bring that to customers because it really is a net new addition. We've loved and respect what ESPN and CBS have done, and we're going to be an additive to that. I think that's the primary piece. The other piece I would say is the industry, and Augusta National being one of them, has seen what we've done with Thursday Night Football and NASCAR and UEFA Champions League and our other big properties that once upon a time folks asked, could this be distributed on the internet? Can Amazon deliver a world-class product? Does the technology work in the way we want it to? And I think we've answered all those questions in a really emphatic way. And so our portfolio of premium events now really is, the discussions are just different.
So I think it's quite interesting that this is not kind of maybe as controversial as, Amazon coming in and taking over kind of live rights off a traditional broadcast. So these are extra hours that have been put into the schedule. And as he says, there is a clamour for it. Martin, I know, is a bigger golf fan than anyone I know, and he's always has often said it. It is frustrating that you can't watch these first few hours of certainly the day 1 and 2. And if you look at what Augusta National have done, yes, they're traditional, but over the last few years, they really have upped the hours of content. Go and have a read of the Sport Business Golf Report, and you'll see. I think they had 18 hours of live coverage in 2024. That went up to 23 in 2025, and now with these extra 2 hours a day from Amazon on Thursday, Friday, you're looking at 27 hours of live coverage. Interestingly, over the last few years, those ESPN Plus and Paramount Plus numbers have been really strong. The streaming numbers are strong. So there's clearly an audience for this that Amazon feel that they can tap into. I don't think you're going to see Amazon, coming forward and kicking out one of the established broadcasters on this. This is, as he says, very much an additive form for the Augusta National.
Yeah, I mean, there was a moment of heightened excitement on the farm when, was it a farmhouse? I suppose it was a farmhouse. I was speaking to one of the execs who got a WhatsApp saying, Amazon's got the US Masters rights. I was like, sorry, what, from CBS? And then we kind of unpicked what it was. I mean, yeah, it's that difference between sort of live coverage and then obviously there's a lot of featured group coverage, there's a lot of specific hole coverage, and there's live from the range coverage before that. I mean, the history of this, it's got so much better, but 1997 was the first time that the first 9 holes were broadcast on US TV, and then I think as a result on global TV. 2002 was the first time that all 18 holes were broadcast by CBS. So it used to be a real mystery as to what the first 9 even looked like. So we've come so far from that. I think I see this as maybe an extension of what's happened with the CBS kind of Paramount coverage at the weekends. As it stands, the weekend coverage, I think, is from 2 p.m. Eastern time on CBS, but from noon until 2 p.m. you have 2 hours of extra coverage on Paramount Plus. So you're now getting this on Amazon during the Thursday and Friday when ESPN is the rights holder. So ESPN begins its coverage at 3 p.m. Eastern. Amazon would kick off its coverage at 1 p.m. Sky, for people here in the UK, it's 7:30 live broadcast, starts at 6:30 on a Sunday. But as I said, it's complicated by the fact that you get all the featured groups coverage. So from 2 p.m. on Thursday and Friday, 3 p.m. at the weekend on Sky, you can watch featured groups, you can watch par threes, you can watch Amen Corner. So there's so much more additional coverage now. But in terms of the live main coverage, this is a big, well, not a big addition, a notable extension of what's happening over the weekend. And I fully agree. I don't see any way that this is a precursor to a main rights deal with Amazon. And the reason being, if you do that, I mean, if that would be hugely controversial, because then you rip up the kind of no rights fee in return for ad time. And the ad time only works if you're getting a sort of main network ad time. If you go to the sponsors and say, well, we'll get you ad time on Amazon, then that totally shifts the conversation. So it's interesting, but maybe not quite as controversial as people first thought.
Well, I think that's the thing about Amazon, isn't it? They're not seeking exclusivity over these rights. Everybody already has Amazon for their shopping or whatever they do. So having a Masters Golf isn't going to add subscribers or stop churn because they already have probably more subscribers than anybody else. And so I think having these headline sports events on Amazon is hugely appealing to the brands, isn't it? And also there's the data. Amazon has more data than anyone else. They're not buying the sport to gain or retain subscribers. It's a value add for them.
Yeah, you made a really good point there about everyone has Prime Video, and you're right. And Charlie actually said to me that in the US, more households have Prime Video memberships or subscriptions than have access to broadcast TV. And we were actually talking about that more in the sense of what Martin talking about on last week's pod of the kind of dropping of the Amazon paywall in certain markets. And he was like, we don't really see it as having a paywall as such, because when you're talking about paywall stuff, people might be thinking of maybe tens of millions of subscribers. We are talking about much bigger than that, and it's quite a low barrier of entry. Yeah, interesting point there.
Yeah, and Amazon also do such a good job with promoting and marketing. I mean, if you're going on to Amazon to buy a book, if anybody buys books anymore, on a Saturday afternoon, you'll see promotions for NASCAR, the NASCAR Cup race that's on that afternoon. So they really drive you into what they've got, what they're showing. Whereas I don't think that's quite the same on YouTube. They don't have the same kind of homepage situation, do they? And Amazon's broadcasts of NASCAR, for example, their NASCAR Cup races so far this year have been getting around 2.2 million per race. And that's pretty much on a par with the cable broadcasts. So that tells you something about, who's watching what at what time, doesn't it?
Yeah, and interestingly, I think their NHL coverage in Canada, which you're very familiar with, Catherine, I believe that now has the audience is an average 10 years younger than it would be on kind of traditional TV. So they are tapping a different kind of audience, which they keep telling rights holders in these conversations, and clearly the numbers are backing that up.
John, your average audience point reminds me of Flavio Briatore this week, discussing Formula One and putting forward a number of 18 to 20 as the average audience of Formula One, which he was quickly corrected by Liberty Media. But we knew what he meant in terms of how it's a shifting dynamic.
Yeah. Slightly missed his numbers.
Well, should we look at some of the other panels that you attended there? Martin, I think you were going to talk about the tennis panel, which was called Redefining the Future of Tennis. And on the panel was Andrea Gaudenzi, the ATP chair, who spoke to us at length for our Global Tennis Report earlier in the year. Martina Storti, the CEO of WTA Ventures. Lou Scher, the president of business operations of the New York Mets, who was formerly the CEO of the U.S. Tennis Association. And Danny Townsend, the CEO of Surge. I would have said SURJ, but it's Surge Sports Investments. So that's quite a who's who of tennis, isn't it, Martin? Who stood out for you in that panel?
Well, I mean, Andrea's probably always going to win that because he's the most pointed and most direct. But there's a lot of baggage in this one, in the sense that this has been a conversation been going on for a long time about the ATP, and Andrea Gaudenzi's leading, the charge, and we're very close to WTA now and close to a commercial merger there around centralizing really the whole of tennis. Naturally, the Grand Slams have had opposition to that and have long-term deals. There's also the whole debate around the calendar, and if you created a Premier Tour, which PIF, as it was I think then, maybe pre-Surge even, was talking to the ATP about doing, and there's huge ructions between ATP, Saudi Alliance, and then Craig Tiley, the CEO of Tennis Australia previously, when all this blew up about a year and a half ago. So it was almost kind of like bringing together sort of families that had arguments in the past and talking about how it was all going to work. Yeah, Danny Townsend was there, and he was very shrewd in his answers and had to be diplomatic given the position that they sit in. And they've got a huge interest in tennis and have invested in hosting deals and in sponsorships and all the rest of it around ATP, WTA, etc. Yeah, I mean, Andrea was probably the headline quotes would be from Andrea. He spoke a lot about how they were now more in agreement than in disagreement. There was quite a funny bit. They talked about kind of Vision 2050 in the previous panel, I think, and he was asked if they would have it done by 2050. And he said, well, yes, only because the market will have forced them to do it by then. His point being, and he's spoken about this a lot, the vision in terms of how the product should be monetized, what the offering should be. There's been a lot of spending in tech and tennis, how the distribution should work. He feels that music, gaming, film, they all are kind of more agile in terms of having fewer stakeholders. They can act faster, and that's where sport kind of has a disadvantage. And maybe tennis has got into a bit of a comfort zone in how it's marketed. And, he made a nod to there's always going to be a debate around splitting the pie, and also how there'd been very little marketing budget for tennis. Yeah, and Lou Scher was able to come back on that, quite interesting. He's now sort of one step departed, obviously having left the USTA and now with the Mets. So he was quite strong on it and, suggested that if the slams and tours got together, then they still wouldn't have had nearly enough kind of marketing clout to get what needed to be done. He said that ultimately what needs to come out of this kind of whole debate needs to be a sort of better improvement of the product, because, as a fan, he felt that scale and leverage doesn't do anything for me as a viewer, is what he said. And he also said that there was too many stakeholders, which was kind of a common theme. Yeah, Andrea, in the points that he was making, was just really reinforcing that this is going to have to happen, or if it doesn't happen, the free market will take care of it. And then Marina Storti really made a nod, I think, to also the ATP sort of commercial merger that will be coming down the line, but felt together that tennis bodies are stronger because they have a bigger commercial platform, allows them to innovate in digital AI and data, and they can align on how they kind of tell the story of the season to the fans. So there was a recognition that the structure of the season needs to change. Actually getting that done, because everybody has vested interests, is extremely difficult. And as I said, Danny Townsend was kind of sitting as an investor in tennis, but as a kind of would-be investor in more tennis, and also said that he himself felt that they would have to change because the free market would happen, and did accept that the tennis was a bit dysfunctional, but said, every sport's dysfunctional in some parts. So he thought that there was a common awareness of what the consumer wants and felt that we're going to get there. So everybody wants the same thing, bigger picture, but I couldn't see any evidence of ATP WTA aside, and we've kind of reported on what's happening there, but I couldn't see any evidence of the whole of tennis getting any further down the line on centralising anything. We continue to write stories about deals that are being done. The most recent was In Front Better and Australian Open long into the future. So it just becomes more and more complicated to untangle all of this. There is no, from what I can see, no tangible progress on a kind of unified, centralised tennis that they talk about.
Well, another sport that has issues of its own in terms of the calendar, a very crowded calendar, is cricket. And John, I believe you attended the cricket panel entitled Cricket Beyond Boundaries, which had another stellar lineup. There was Manoj Badale, the owner of the IPL's Rajasthan Royals and the two Royals franchises in South Africa and the Caribbean, Richard Thompson, chair of the England and Wales Cricket Board, and of course Graham Smith, the former South African cricketer and the SA20 League commissioner. John, your thoughts on that panel?
Yeah, interesting heavyweight panels, you say, and actually the biggest name on there, Graham Smith, bless him, he didn't really get to say too much because Richard Thompson is an excellent orator and very interesting. And obviously the 100 came up. I feel we've talked at length about the investment in the 100 and that process. So let's kind of park that for now. Nothing kind of new was learnt there. And again, we go back to the very start of this podcast where we talked about this being a lot more of a US feel to this event. And that certainly was. The kind of angling on this panel was, looking to where the next big growth market for this sport, the Indian market absolutely dominate. And there's an acceptance that, it is going to be the US with the Olympics in 2028. I think Richard Thompson called it the Olympics will be the moment cricket moves from being international to being global, which I thought was kind of quite a nice line. You've got LA 28, obviously, Brisbane 2030, you would think cricket will stay on the programme. There's no kind of guarantee, of course. And then, Delhi, if Delhi is looking like the host of or Ahmedabad or wherever in India is looking like the host of the 2036 Olympics, then you can certainly see cricket staying there. So that would be kind of 3 games worth. If they can't take advantage of that opportunity, then globally, then I think that's a problem. So I think it's going to grow. But interestingly, Richard Thompson again said we had a Cricket World Cup in the US last year, and there's an acceptance and admittance that really it didn't move the needle. It didn't do enough to make younger people want to get into cricket. You've got Major League Cricket, which has been somewhat of a success over its few years. But interestingly, what the ECB are looking to do, and he said, it's easier for the BCCI because you've got a lot of Bollywood stars that have grown up playing cricket, right? It's fine for them. But if you want to really tap the US, you haven't really got many like Hollywood actors that kind of have sent down a few overs on a Sunday morning. The ECB have kind of got this project, it's called Bollywood Hollywood, which they're going to try and put on like a pro-am, pro-celeb game in the US. And he said the ECB have been, he said, inundated with requests from the likes of Hugh Jackman, Ed Sheeran, Chris Martin, people that are kind of grown up playing cricket at school and stuff that have become kind of global stars in their own field. And they're going to hope that this kind of celebrity push will really take cricket to the next level and just draw in some eyeballs and that. So I think that's going to be kind of a fun thing to kind of keep an eye out for. The other side of it kind of got the entertainment to the kind of money, if you like. Kind of an interesting line from Manoj Badale from the Rajasthan Royals, who kind of talked about the opening up of the gambling industry in the US, what that has done for the NFL and what cricket can take from that. He said these numbers were startling, weren't they, Martin? 50 of the most gambled on events in 2024, 49 of them were cricket games. 48 of those were IPL games. He said $1.5 billion is bet on every IPL game. And now you're bearing in mind that you can't gamble legally in India, so all of this is kind of coming out of Dubai. I think those numbers are absolutely staggering and should make most kind of businessmen in America kind of sit up and think, yeah, we should be getting into this because there is a lot of money there.
He didn't specify whether this was, well, I say betting in India. He obviously made clear that a lot of this was being done out of Dubai, but whether he meant kind of Indian diaspora betting or whether he meant as a sort of global figure. If it's the latter, it is astonishing. One of the other big headlines from the panels, Catherine, was that niche sports is pronounced niche sports. Mark Shapiro says niche sports. I presume it's spelled NITSCH, but we have another, along with David Zaslav, we have another vote for niche over niche.
Well, I can tell you in Canada, we say niche, and niche is very much a south of the border thing. So there you go. Thank you for that, gentlemen. Great information from the IMG RedBird Summit. And we're going to take a short break before we move on to our last section.
Stay ahead in the business of sport with trusted news, data, and analysis across media rights, sponsorship, and more. Explore our subscription options at sportbusiness.com.
Welcome back to the Sport Business Podcast, bringing you the latest sports business industry news. And once again, from the IMG RedBird Summit, Martin and John, we're going to talk about the third burning question that you addressed, the issue of minimum guarantees. Are those still a thing? And can you put that into the context of IMG in light of the global invitation to tender issued by CAF, the Confederation of African Football, for which they're favoured, I believe, and which will no doubt require one of those hefty minimum guarantees for the media rights portion anyway. Martin, you spoke to some senior executives about this. Tell me what they told you.
Yeah, I mean, I'll immediately kind of divert people to a story we published on Friday about this in Sport Business News. If people are looking to see, there's two bidders left. It's IMG and it's Irish Sport Media, expecting a decision on this before the end of the month, and then it would go to the COMESA, the regulator in Southern and Eastern Africa, to judge whether an 8-year deal will be allowed. Initially, this was a 4-year invitation to tender for media rights, but also all the other commercial rights, sponsorship, betting, the whole gambit for globally, with the exception of BN's markets, but including Sub-Saharan Africa on the media side. It raised the interesting question in the industry, I suppose, about, clearly minimum guarantees are still paid at lower levels for certain rights. We know that. But talking to Mark Shapiro, it was an opportunity to ask him generally, and I did mention about CAF as well, especially on the back of soundbites that the CAF president, Patrice Motsepe, gave earlier this month, that they were going to raise $1 billion from this wider partnership, which, let's take that with, I don't know what's the difference between a pinch and a minor salt, what's in between there. I mean, I would advise people to read the article. It's not a $1 billion minimum guarantee over 8 years. It's not even a $600 million guarantee over 8 years. It would be certainly a good chunk less than that. However, it proves that minimum guarantees are still required for top tier properties. Sometimes when they get too big, if you look at UEFA club rights, obviously team had worked on a commission basis because nobody's going to come and put down the size of minimum guarantee needed to satisfy that contract. But for something like CAF and the rights on the table, they went into the tender looking for one. I just thought it was an appropriate time to ask TKO, the new owners of IMG, whether putting down big minimum guarantees was still part of their business plan. If you bear in mind how much IMG has changed as a business, how much it got burnt in the past by, and I put these to him, the Serie A international rights deal, the FA Cup international rights deal that they had, that would always weigh heavily on their finances when they came out, and then when Endeavour's finances previously. So I asked him the question as to, would TKO and IMG specifically, with their backing, put down significant size minimum guarantees to win business? And here's what he said.
Very similar to On Location, which is the leading premium hospitality business across sports globally. The minimum guarantee is not high on our list. We will do it for the right properties where it makes sense and our calculations show our risk level to be low. But we are not going to take big swings that ultimately are financially irresponsible. And if there's going to be a race to the moon as it relates to the price of sports rights, we're not going to play in that, period. Certainly, we want to bid for the big properties, and we think we are the best partner for those property owners because of the holistic solution IMG brings. And part of that is writing a check, and we get that, and we understand that, and we'll do that. But we won't be imprudent. We won't be irresponsible. And we just simply won't take the same kind of risk we took years ago because we learned our lesson as it relates to some of the properties you mentioned.
Notable that he says that they won't be irresponsible. I think we can all agree that $1 billion over 8 years for the CAF rights would be irresponsible, and that's not the case. That's not what's happening. So it makes sense if they're bidding for that contract at a much lower level where they feel a property that can generate a lot of upside. I mean, to be clear, that deal isn't over the line yet. Iris has also been bidding. Certainly I'd consider IMG as a heavy favourite to get it. But the mention of On Location is also significant. It is minimum guarantees put down for On Location for the Olympics, certainly. And then the sort of sales process of selling hospitality is a tough business. And I think they went in big to sort of establish premium market position. There have been references in the financial results to the impact of that and the kind of sort of associated write-downs, etc. So, yeah, I thought that was a very insightful and very decisive answer from Mark. And also, once again, showcasing he's got a fantastic voice. I mean, it goes up and down in octaves, and his passion, he showed that throughout. He was only there on the Tuesday and then flew, because John didn't see him because John came on the Wednesday, but he flew back to, was it Vegas or something, back to the States anyway. And that man has stamina, let me say that.
Well, that's enough of the serious stuff. Thank you both very much. And let's move on to what we're looking at in the week ahead. I think we've got some quirky and amusing things to talk about and any other business, which I think our listeners will find interesting. Martin, what are you looking at for the week ahead?
I'm going to be more serious this week, actually.
Oh.
Sorry to disappoint, but to make a point in the look ahead, I suppose, about the Women's Rugby World Cup final, which will be on the 27th of September. Looking ahead to that, but also some of the figures have been very good. I mean, in France for the quarterfinal, TF1 got an average of 3.4 million viewers, a share of 33% for France's win over Ireland. I think it's doing very well we don't have a kind of exhaustive list of all the ratings yet for all the different countries, but my sense would be big buy-in from the big countries, as you would expect. Scotland actually did very well this year, that they got hammered by England in the quarterfinals. The tricky bit is, I think up to the quarterfinals, only 4 matches were decided by 7 points or fewer. There are so many, because of the kind of disparity in funding, especially if you look at Scotland and England, would explain that result and would explain a lot of results. So at the top end of women's rugby, everything is very healthy. New Zealand, Canada, France and England in the semi-finals, but even go back and look at the quarters, and Australia got beaten 46-5 by Canada. Maybe a comparison with the FIFA Women's World Cup, which was maybe at this stage, if you go back maybe 10, 12 years, the gap between the strong, the big and the emerging nations on the pitch is quite big, which leads to a lot of non-competitive matches. Yes, you still get a lot of non-competitive matches at the Men's Rugby World Cup, but to me it feels like it's a bigger gap, and then to create that sort of viewing interest across the whole tournament is more difficult. But let's see. I mean, I think the final ratings will be huge, and at the top end I think it's been a pretty successful tournament held here in England.
Canada's done very well, and it's disappointing here to have virtually no publicity about it. It's on a paid channel, and I don't know anyone who's watched it. And skunking Australia like that should be headline news, but it's not really.
Did you just say skunking? What does skunking mean, Catherine?
Skunking. Well, that shows my roots even more. There's skunks walking around the street even as I speak. To skunk someone is to beat them 46-5 or whatever the score was. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah,
and Scotland is we say batter in Scotland, but that's probably because it's a nod to our cuisine.
Well, to pick up the theme of Canadian sport once again, what I'm looking forward to is a potential case of giant slaying, because we have our cup final, our FA Cup final coming up on October 1st. And the 2 teams playing it are the Vancouver Whitecaps, who are currently 4th in Major League Soccer. And as we know, they've signed Thomas Müller. Remember him? Bayern Munich, Germany. He scored a hat trick on his 36th birthday last week against Philadelphia, which are the top team in the league. So anyway, they're going to be playing in the final Vancouver Football Club, which is the last place team in the Canadian Premier League. And it's the first time a Canadian Premier League team has been in the final of our cup tournament. So that's terribly exciting. I think it's going to be a difficult task for Vancouver Football Club to have a go at Vancouver Whitecaps. But the point is that having 2 Vancouver teams in the cup final will do a lot to raise interest towards the World Cup, which is taking place 7 matches in Vancouver. So that's the kind of thing we need to really drum up interest and passion for the Football World Cup taking place in North America next year. So that's my looking ahead. And that cup final is on October 1st. So that'll be terribly exciting. And it will be on a pay channel here on TSN. So hopefully it'll get some good traction. Who knows? John, what are you looking at next week? Do you have anything?
Yeah, a little peek into the world of gaming. See, the EAFC, Electronic Arts kind of football franchise. New one is out on the 26th of September, and I think it's going to be an important one for them, because the last one, EA 25, if you look at EA, they had to put out a statement earlier this year to kind of downgrade their financial projections for the year, weaker than expected financial performance. And actually EA FC 25, last year's game, was cited as one of the kind of 2 main reasons for that, kind of poorer sales than they expected. So I just wonder if there's kind of gaming or franchise fatigue when it comes to this, because this is only the 3rd iteration of it since they broke from FIFA. That kind of has never been really resolved. FIFA was supposed to be launching their own game. That has never got off the ground. Recently, a few months ago now, re-signed with Konami to carry on with the eFootball series, which really hasn't kind of got anywhere near the level that EAFC is. Yeah, I just think we always talk about, when you talk to sports, they always say, oh, we're not just competing with our own sport, we're competing with general entertainment on Netflix, we're competing with gaming. And if you look at the gaming sector now, I think that there are signs that these huge game sales aren't what they were. And you look at Netflix themselves, have also got a gaming element to them now as well, that you can kind of play games on. So I just wonder how those sales are going to go when we start to see them in the fourth quarter.
Interesting.
Catherine, I'm going to throw the any other business over to you, because I think you've been monitoring how many flamboyant alcoholic drinks people have been consuming at major sports events.
Well, absolutely. The US Open tennis Grand Slam, they released some numbers last week, or I think earlier this week, showing the revenues that were earned at this year's tournament. And the thing that really stood out to me was the $17 million that were earned in revenues from the sale of the honey juice cocktail. And that's just from one drink. There were lots of other drinks sold on site, but this honey juice is lemonade, raspberry liqueur, and Grey Goose vodka. And of course, Grey Goose have been a sponsor of the US Open for nearly 20 years. And they started serving the honey juice in 2006. But this year, they sold 738,459 honey juice cocktails at $23 each. So that's where you get the 17 million from. And what really stood out for me is this, it's a beautiful green drink, or actually it's red with the raspberry liqueur, but it has 3 melon balls placed artfully atop the cup. And they're meant to represent tennis balls, of course. And this year, there were 2.3 million melon balls scooped by hand with 800 melon baller devices, because they don't have an industrial solution for that yet. So that was 400,000 more melon balls than were scooped last year. Go figure.
Follow that, Martin.
Is there any direct link to the increase in heckling at the tournament to the alcohol consumption?
I don't know about that, potentially. I did hear someone say that a lot of people had a lot to drink, and there was a lot of people staggering about. And I don't know how they did it with cocktails at $23 each. That's hefty for one drink, isn't it?
It is, and it actually brings us back to one of the sessions actually at the IMG RedBird Summit, when Lou Scher was making quite a salient point about tennis still, and this is a success story clearly, but tennis still being too attached to the kind of event revenues. He wasn't talking about cocktails, but he was talking about ticketing revenues and event revenues, and not looking at that kind of bigger pie of the overall commercials. But nobody's going to turn down that kind of money, clearly.
Yeah. And there is a rival melon drink that was introduced this year, the watermelon slice, which was introduced by Moet and Chandon Champagne, which is a new sponsor from last year. And their rival melon drink was retailing at $32 per drink. So I think event revenues may even go up next year with the success or not of the watermelon slice. So moving over to the West Coast again, I'll bring up my Vancouver theme again, but I wanted to mention that September 12th was named in perpetuity by the city of Vancouver to be Victor Montagliani Day. And as we know, Victor Montagliani is the president of CONCACAF and a FIFA vice president. And the day was named in his honor because he's a lifelong champion of the beautiful game. And he was instrumental in bringing the World Cup to Canada, the US, and Mexico next year. But a bit of background on Victor Montagliani. He grew up in East Vancouver, in the Italian community there, and he was actually known at the time as the Tony Soprano of soccer in the province, which is a bit ironic, actually, because he was brought in 2016 to be president of CONCACAF to clean up the corruption after the FIFA bribery scandal in 2014. So great stuff that the Tony Soprano of British Columbia football was brought in to clean up the corruption, which he's done. And as I said, he was instrumental in bringing the World Cup to North America, and he was able to convince Sunil Gulati at the U.S. Soccer Federation to consider a joint bid with Canada and Mexico. And a direct quote from Victor at the time was, "If we can put maple syrup and churros on your attitude, we'll win the World Cup." And brilliant quote from Victor. He's a real character. He's done a lot for soccer in the CONCACAF region. And September 12th, Victor Montagliani Day.
Would you typically put maple syrup on churros?
I haven't ever done that, and I don't think it's a thing, but I think that's a really good idea. I think you're onto something, Martin.
Would you be able to buy that on an aeroplane, Catherine? Maybe Victor could... would he be able to tell us that?
It could be the Victor Montagliani churro, really. You could give him a new honor. Victor
started his career as an air steward, was it?
He was a flight attendant, straight out of uni. His first job was as a flight attendant.
There you go.
There you go. And then he became an insurance salesman. He sold insurance. But just on that note, if we have Victor Montagliani Day, are we going to see? Well, Gianni Infantino already has a Panini sticker, so he doesn't need a day. But are we going to see an Alexander Seferin Day? What do you think?
Yeah, every day is Gianni Day.
I think in the UK you would struggle to get excited about some of the former FA presidents. I don't think you would have a Greg Dyke Day. No, possibly not.
I think that is a fantastic way to wrap up this week's pod. Thank you both. And I'm sure we'll be seeing you both next week with more frontline insights from the sports industry. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you want to know more about today's stories or any of our other reports and analyses, and especially if you're looking for the world's largest collection of accurate rights fees across media and sponsorship, you know where to go. Take a look at subscription options on our website or get in touch with us via email at info@sportbusiness.com. As always, you can enter the code SBPodcast30 at the checkout and you'll get a 30% discount on annual and monthly Sport Business subscriptions. Please don't forget to share your thoughts on this episode and give us your feedback in a review on the Apple Podcast, Spotify, and YouTube platforms. And watch out for our weekly LinkedIn posts promoting the podcast, where you can, of course, also leave a comment. Thank you all for tuning in, for reading, for subscribing. I'm Catherine Davies, and we'll be back again next week with the Sport Business Podcast.